Marilyn Monroe walked off the stage in the middle of a shoot, past the director and her publicist, ignoring the chaos she created. But she wasn't looking for another celebrity or a party. She was looking for the only man in the studio who was crying more deeply than she was. What she found, huddled in a dark utility closet, was a janitor named Arthur, and the secret promise she made him that night would shock the entire film crew, changing his family's fate forever. She stood in the blinding, artificial light, the most famous woman in the world, yet feeling more alone than a ghost haunting an empty house. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on the Fox lot, and the glamour that surrounded Marilyn Monroe had curdled into sheer exhaustion, leaving her face pale beneath the heavy stage makeup. If the cameras could have captured the silence inside her head, they would have found not the laughter of a siren, but the hollow echo of a gilded cage. The director, a man whose patience had vanished hours ago, snapped a final, "Cut! Print it!" and the entire mechanism of the soundstage seemed to sigh in relief. The grips began their methodical dismantling, their movements heavy and resentful. Marilyn hated the rush of the crew to escape, because that meant she was once again left exposed, a target for the ever-present silent judgment of those who watched her. They saw the sparkle, the fame, the endless supply of powerful men, but they never saw the truth. A woman profoundly, terrifyingly alone in a room full of people. She longed for the sanctuary of her trailer, a tiny aluminum bubble where she could peel off the layers of paint and performance, but the path back seemed too long, too exposed, especially with the publicist already planning her next day. So she chose a different direction. She pulled the collar of her satin robe tighter, ignoring the hushed calls of her assistant, and slipped away from the light. She moved toward the back corridors, the service hallways, the part of the studio where the illusion ended, and the rough reality of plaster, cables, and dust began. She noticed, in the shadows, the only people moving without malice were the cleaning staff, silent and methodical, the only truly quiet souls in the building. This dark maze of the backlot was the only place where Marilyn felt the heavy weight of her celebrity lift, if only for a few steps. She thought she was searching for silence, a simple moment of invisibility. What she was about to find, however, was something far more profound than silence, a broken heart echoing her own. As she rounded a dark corner marked "Staff Only," Marilyn slowed, suddenly aware that she was not alone, and that the quiet she sought had been abruptly shattered by the most genuine, rawest sound she had heard all night. When a woman is the brightest star in the universe, the people who keep the stage clean become truly invisible. His name was Arthur, but on the Fox lot, he was simply the shadow that followed the light, the mop pushing the confetti of yesterday's dreams down the long corridors. For 30 years, Arthur had worked the night shift, a quiet man whose dignity was measured not by his paycheck, but by the quiet confidence with which he polished the floors where legends walked. Arthur was approximately 55, a man whose hands were permanently lined not with fame, but with the honest grime of hard work. Hands that had raised 3 children and held a wife through every joy and sorrow life could offer. Tonight, the heavy, worn-down look on his face had nothing to do with the hour. It was the crushing weight of a tragedy unfolding miles away. Just an hour earlier, he had taken a frantic phone call in the boiler room, the one place he could count on silence. His eldest daughter, Amelia, was a county general needing a critical, immediate surgical procedure. The doctors were ready, but the hospital's administration was not. A devastating bureaucratic error meant the family's coverage was contested, and without a substantial cash payment, the life-saving procedure could not move forward. The amount demanded was $4,200, more than Arthur made in 3 months. He had pleaded, his voice breaking, trying to explain his 30 years of studio loyalty, but the hospital's voice was cold, flat, and absolute. There was no sympathy for the working man in the ledger books. He knew, with a certainty that turned his stomach to ice, that he was failing his family. He tried to focus on the task at hand, to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of the broom, but every sweep only amplified his fear. A young, impatient assistant director rushed past, shouting into a telephone, completely oblivious to Arthur's presence, nearly kicking over his bucket of cleaning solution. "Watch it, old-timer," the director snapped without even breaking stride, treating Arthur like a minor obstacle, a piece of studio furniture that had gotten in the way. It was a perfect summation of Arthur's existence on the lot, vital to the studio's cleanliness, yet utterly, devastatingly insignificant to its people. The raw injustice of it all, that 30 years of dedication could be wiped away by a single crushing financial blow, sent a tremor through his quiet resolve. He stopped sweeping, leaning his forehead against the cold cement wall in the darkened hallway, his breathing shallow and quick. The vast, empty soundstage was a monument to wealth and fantasy, yet in its darkest corner, a good man was being silently crushed by the real-world weight of poverty and failing health. Arthur knew he had to figure out what to do, how to secure that money, but the shame of his inability was overwhelming. He slipped into a maintenance alcove, a hidden space shielded from the long glare of the studio's main lights, and pulled out the crumpled hospital bill. He bowed his head, letting the exhaustion and the terror finally break through the hard shell of his dignity, and a single silent tear escaped, followed quickly by another. Marilyn had planned only a short detour, a moment to breathe before the world rushed in again, but the long, low sound she heard was not the sigh of the soundstage. It was the profound, unmistakable noise of a heart utterly broken. It was a sound that cut through the thick walls of her own exhaustion and celebrity like a knife. She stopped dead in the cold cement hallway. The noise was too raw, too genuine to be acting. She had heard plenty of manufactured sorrow on set, from the histrionics of jealous co-stars to the manufactured anger of frustrated directors. But this was different. This was the sound of a private, desperate failure, a pain too deep to be rehearsed. It emanated from a small, dark maintenance alcove tucked away beneath a fire escape sign, a place where people hid things the cameras weren't supposed to capture. She hesitated. The instinct of any star, of anyone constantly under scrutiny, is to retreat, to avoid the unexpected, to let the staff handle the mess. Her publicist would have had a fit, but Marilyn, the real Norma Jean beneath the platinum wig, had a powerful primal empathy that often overruled her common sense, an empathy born of her own rough, unstable childhood. She knew the particular chill of feeling abandoned, of being utterly without help. She knew what desperation sounded like. She quietly pushed the heavy metal door to the alcove open, just enough to peer inside. The space was barely 6 feet wide, filled with industrial mops and buckets, and there, hunched over on a milk crate, was Arthur, the janitor she had seen sweeping the main set earlier. His face was buried in his calloused hands, and his uniform shirt shook with suppressed sobs. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a rhythmic, awful rocking, the sign of a man whose control had completely dissolved. For a brief, terrifying second, Arthur looked up, his eyes red and wet, catching her in the dim light. The look on his face wasn't relief at being found, it was utter humiliation and panic. He immediately tried to shrink, to make himself smaller, to disappear behind a mop bucket, utterly ashamed that the most famous woman in the world had witnessed his complete unraveling. His fear was palpable. Fear that he would be disciplined. Fear that he had trespassed by showing human weakness on the cold, beautiful stage of Hollywood fantasy. Marilyn's heart was constricted. She did not see a janitor. She saw a good man in the grip of a powerlessness she recognized instantly. Without thinking about her schedule, her safety, or the headlines, she slipped fully into the narrow alcove and gently closed the door behind her. The moment she closed the door, she shut out the studio lights, the cameras, and the cynical judgment of the world, creating a tiny bubble of intimacy and darkness. She took one step toward the shaken man, preparing to speak, recognizing that in this moment the star had become the witness, and the janitor the broken soul. Arthur looked up and saw not the dazzling fantasy of Marilyn Monroe, but the quiet, shadowed face of a woman whose own eyes held a deep, familiar ache. His first reaction was not starstruck awe, but overwhelming shame, the shame of a working man caught showing profound personal weakness. He tried desperately to regain his composure, fumbling for a cleaning rag to hastily wipe his face, but his hands were trembling too fiercely. "Miss Monroe, I am terribly sorry. I shouldn't be here. I'll go right now," he whispered, his voice thick with suppressed emotion and the absolute certainty he was about to be fired. The janitor who cried on the job. It was the ultimate studio sin, but Marilyn did the opposite of what every other person in that ruthless town would have done. She didn't recoil from his distress. She leaned into it. She lowered herself slowly, gracefully, despite the constricting satin robe and the discomfort of the milk crate-strewn floor, until she was kneeling on the cold cement eye level with Arthur. It was a gesture of immediate, profound equality, dissolving the vast distance between the star and the sweeper in a single, humbling action. "Please," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, intimate and gentle, the true Norma Jean voice, stripped of its breathless public tremor. "Don't apologize for feeling. It's the only real thing in this whole building." Arthur simply stared, bewildered by this act of unexpected grace. He had expected a reprimand, a cold instruction to leave, certainly not this genuine human concern. He watched her face, searching for the artifice, the famous wink or the practiced pout, but found only quiet empathy. "You looked sad, Miss Monroe," Arthur mumbled, shifting uncomfortably. "But you're Marilyn Monroe. You've got the world." A fragile, heartbreaking smile touched her lips. "The world," she murmured, shaking her head. "The world is a very big, very cold place, Arthur. And sometimes this place, this soundstage, it squeezes the life right out of you, doesn't it?" She paused, letting the silence settle, allowing him to feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in perhaps decades. She gently reached out a hand, not to touch him, but simply to rest it near his, an invitation for trust. "What is it, Arthur? What is it that brought you back here, away from the light?" She didn't press. She simply opened a door, indicating that she understood the crushing pressure of a secret too big to carry alone. He looked from her eyes to the floor, recognizing that in this moment, under the cloak of night, the star was offering him not charity, but common ground. It was the silent promise of a listener, and that was the first thing that began to slow the frantic rhythm of his heart. He hesitated one last moment, a lifetime of ingrained reserve warring with the overwhelming need to simply speak the truth of his burden out loud. Then, the immense pressure of his daughter's situation won out, and he began, the words catching in his throat like shards of ice. Arthur's confession did not begin with anger or resentment. It began with the simple, heartbreaking facts of a man whose life was measured in shift hours and overdue bills. He spoke hesitantly at first, thick with the humiliation of revealing his poverty to the woman who symbolized the world's wealth, but Marilyn never broke his gaze. He told her everything. The $4,200 required for his daughter Amelia's immediate critical surgical procedure, the cold refusal of the hospital administration, the 3 decades he had faithfully given to the studio, only to discover his family was one illness away from absolute ruin. 30 years, Miss Monroe, Arthur managed, shaking his head slowly, his voice laced with the bitterness of betrayal. 30 years of cleaning up after the parties and the premieres, the tantrums and the triumphs. I never asked for a raise, never missed a shift. And now they tell me my little girl might suffer because of a paperwork error. I just need time, but they want the money now. Marilyn listened, truly listened, the roar of the studio fading until only Arthur's quiet, desperate voice filled the small alcove. In his words, she heard the ghosts of her own childhood, the instability, the fear of the next day, the constant, grinding anxiety that money could solve every problem and its lack could create every sorrow. She remembered being Norma Jean, poor and powerless, watching the world's luxury unfold on silver screens she could never afford to visit. Arthur wasn't asking for charity. He was asking for dignity, for a chance to save his child, and the sheer impossibility of his situation was a reflection of the cruelty of the world outside the camera's lens. "The studio," Arthur continued, looking down at his worn hands, "they don't even see us, Miss Monroe. We are just the people who make sure the stars don't slip on the floor. I would work every single hour, but I cannot earn that much before morning. I feel like I've failed my family entirely." Marilyn finally broke the silence, her voice resonating with an unexpected steel. "You haven't failed, Arthur. The system has failed you. They trade in dreams here, but they forget that the people who clean up the glitter have real lives." She instinctively understood that Arthur's pride was as vast as his distress. He did not want handouts. He wanted the opportunity to remain a provider. Marilyn stood up slowly, the movement graceful but resolute, her face now completely composed. She looked down at Arthur, kneeling on the cold floor, and a profound decision hardened her jaw, turning the actress into a protector. She knew exactly what she had to do, and that whatever it was, it could never be traced back to her. Marilyn Monroe, the woman who had made an entire career out of being perfectly visible, was about to execute an act of kindness that had to be kept absolutely secret. Her celebrity was a double-edged sword, powerful enough to help, but so public that any good deed would be twisted into a publicity stunt. She looked at Arthur, the despair still etched around his tired eyes, and her voice became low and conspiratorial, the tone of a close friend sharing a serious plan. "Arthur, listen to me closely," she instructed, her gaze firm. "I am going to help you, but you must promise me one thing. You can never tell anyone, not your family, not the studio, and certainly not the press, that I spoke to you tonight or that I had anything to do with what happens next." Arthur blinked, stunned. He tried to protest, to say he couldn't accept such a huge favor, but Marilyn cut him off gently. This isn't charity, Arthur. This is about making things right. This is about one human being seeing another. But if the studio finds out, they will use it. They will spin it, or worse, they'll stop me from doing it entirely. They cannot know the real Norma Jean is doing this. She emphasized the need for anonymity, explaining that only in the shadows could true kindness flourish, untouched by the cynicism of Hollywood. She then pulled a small silver item from the pocket of her satin robe, a vintage, delicate, compact mirror, its casing etched with the initials MM. It was an intimate object, something she carried with her constantly. She handed it to Arthur. I need the details, Arthur. The hospital's name, the department, the exact amount they require, and the name of the administrator who is giving you trouble. As Arthur recited the information, Marilyn carefully wrote it down on the back of the hospital bill, using the mirror's smooth surface as a writing desk. It was an image of stunning contrast, the icon writing the key to a janitor's salvation on a studio prop. Keep this mirror, she said, pressing it into his hand. It's a reminder that you are a good father and a good man, and that tonight this secret belongs only to us. The compact felt heavy and cool in Arthur's calloused palm, a physical token of an impossible promise. He looked at the mirror and felt a fresh wave of panic. How could such a fragile piece of hope stand up to the unmoving wall of the hospital's administration? What if she forgot the name of the janitor in the alcove? The fragile hope of the mirror was immediately tempered by the absolute certainty of his financial predicament. He knew he had risked everything on a promise from a woman famous for being unreliable. He looked at the mirror, then back at Marilyn, and realized she was using the very currency of her fame, her wealth, and her influence to buy back his dignity. She gave him a final fleeting smile, a true smile, not the camera kind, and told him to go home and get some rest. She then slipped out of the alcove, leaving Arthur alone with the mirror and the weight of a secret that would either save his daughter or cost him his job. The moment Marilyn Monroe vanished into the night, the vacuum she left behind on the set was instantly filled with gossip, a venomous buzz far louder than the morning's call time. No one could believe the star had simply walked away from the final call. They needed a drama to explain the diva's disappearance. The crew gathered in hushed, cynical knots, stirring lukewarm coffee cups and trading whispered theories. The popular consensus, the one that made the most sense to their jaded Hollywood minds, was that she had thrown a star tantrum. Nobody, absolutely nobody, imagined that the most visible woman in the world had stopped for the most invisible man. That morning, Arthur arrived for his shift on legs that felt like lead. He was terrified, convinced that the studio manager, Mr. Thorne, had already been alerted to his unprofessional behavior. He carried the compact mirror in his pocket, a small, heavy piece of evidence that felt both like a promise of salvation and a ticking time clock counting down to his ruin. As he began his sweeping near the main soundstage, Arthur noticed the crew looking at him strangely. Joe, the bulky grip, walked past him with the production assistant, Frankie. "Can you believe the nerve?" Frankie muttered, loud enough for Arthur to hear. She probably broke down because her diamond bracelet wasn't shiny enough, and now Thorne's on the warpath. He's going to make an example out of the poor old coot who got in her way. Joe nodded cynically. "If I was Arthur, I'd have just quit already. They'll probably throw the book at him for disturbing the talent." The audible, cutting cynicism of the crew twisted Arthur's stomach. He realized the world saw him only as a liability, easily disposable. Suddenly, the assistant director's voice sliced through the drone of the morning crew. "Arthur, Mr. Thorne wants to see you. Now, corner office." The words struck Arthur like a physical blow. This was it. The meeting was a command performance in the executive suite. He dropped his broom. Arthur, clutching the small, cold, compact mirror deep in his pocket, began the long, agonizing walk down the marble corridor toward the corner office. With every step, he prepared to be dismissed and humiliated, his heart sinking with the certainty that his family's last fragile hope was about to be officially canceled. The office of Mr. Thorne was everything the soundstage was not: small, cold, and utterly devoid of color, furnished only with hard-edged, expensive mahogany, the perfect lair for a man whose heart was ruled by ledgers and bottom lines. Arthur stood before the formidable desk, feeling the immense pressure of the studio's authority bearing down on him. Mr. Thorne, the studio manager, did not invite Arthur to sit. He simply fixed the janitor with a cold, unforgiving stare. Arthur's hands, still clutching the delicate Marilyn Monroe compact mirror in his jacket pocket, were clammy with terror. "Arthur," Thorne began, his voice a low, precise instrument of intimidation, "we need to discuss your responsibilities, specifically your unauthorized contact with talent last night. Do you understand the seriousness of breaching protocol?" Arthur swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I apologize, sir. It was a momentary lapse. I was dealing with a stressful family matter." Thorne scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound that conveyed volumes about his view of Arthur's stress. "Family matters are to be kept off the clock, Arthur. We run a professional operation here, not a counseling service. Your job is to sweep, not to solicit favors from our principal asset." Thorne leaned forward, clearly preparing to deliver the final, crushing sentence. Arthur braced himself, the despair returning with overwhelming force. He closed his eyes momentarily, saying a silent plea for his daughter. Then, the black bakelite telephone on Thorne's desk screamed, shattering the tension. Thorne snatched the receiver. "Thorne speaking." He listened, his face remaining impassive for a long moment, simply nodding along to the smooth, confident voice on the other end. Arthur's entire body tensed. He assumed the call was from the hospital administrator, confirming that the surgical procedure was officially denied. He waited for Thorne to relay the crushing news, expecting to hear the words that would finalize his daughter's suffering and his career's end. Thorne finally spoke, his tone changing from icy authority to hesitant, almost fearful compliance. "Yes, George. Understood. The full amount has been received, and the arrangements for the family trust. Yes, I'll handle the paperwork immediately." He paused, then added with an uncharacteristic softness, "I understand the instructions regarding confidentiality. Absolutely. Nothing will be said." Thorne slowly replaced the receiver, his eyes returning to Arthur, but the loathing had been replaced by a mixture of shock and sheer professional bewilderment. He didn't look at Arthur the janitor anymore. He looked at Arthur the untouchable protected interest. Thorne slowly reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope, and pushed it across the massive desk toward Arthur. The manager's jaw was tight. "Arthur," Thorne said, the word heavy with implication, "your family situation has been resolved. All outstanding financial issues have been addressed by an anonymous third party. Furthermore, your late shift cleaning duties have been permanently reassigned to the daytime schedule, effective immediately." Thorne stood up, a clear signal the meeting was over. "You are relieved of duty for the rest of the day. Go home, Arthur. You're done here." Arthur, his mind reeling, picked up the heavy, sealed envelope, its weight a promise and a mystery all at once, and realized he had been saved. But he had no idea of the miracle that now rested in his trembling hands. He found refuge in the deserted lunchroom, the same cold, utilitarian space where he ate his lonely midnight sandwich. The air was thick with the scent of old coffee and lingering dread. Arthur sat down heavily, staring at the sealed manila envelope, its heavy paper shell holding the unbelievable truth that had just fractured Mr. Thorne's cold demeanor. The tension was almost unbearable. Arthur's hands, which had scrubbed the grime off the world's biggest stars for 30 years, were shaking too hard to open the envelope cleanly. He slid his thumb carefully beneath the flap and slowly pulled out the contents. A bank transfer confirmation and a brief typewritten note on expensive personalized stationery. The confirmation was immediate and staggering. $4,200 had been wired to County General Hospital, settling his daughter Amelia's entire surgical bill. But it was the typewritten note, clearly composed by a lawyer but signed by no one, that truly held the power. It stated simply that a private anonymous fund had been established to cover all future necessary medical expenses for Amelia for the next 5 years, including rehabilitation and care. The 5-year commitment was the final, overwhelming revelation. It wasn't just a temporary loan, it was the purchase of his family's long-term peace. The studio's manager had been right. His family's situation was resolved, completely and permanently. Arthur read the note once, then twice, then a third time, searching for the catch, the fine print, the betrayal. There was none. There was only the immense, quiet magnitude of the kindness. Instead, the man who had struggled so valiantly to hold his despair in check on the soundstage now completely and irrevocably broke with relief. It wasn't the raw, painful weeping of the night before. This was a sound of profound, guttural catharsis. It was the sound of a father's burden being miraculously lifted, the terrible, squeezing fear for his child's well-being suddenly dissolving into thin air. Tears poured down his face. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of thanksgiving, of grace, of an impossible, overwhelming reprieve. At that precise moment, Joe the Grip, who had been watching Arthur earlier, walked into the lunchroom. He stopped dead in the doorway, witnessing the janitor's silent, shaking breakdown, a man overwhelmed by a flood of quiet, radiant relief. Joe had heard the rumors of Marilyn's tantrum and Thorne's harsh meeting, and he had expected Arthur to be weeping with grief over losing his job. Instead, he saw a man quietly, absolutely saved. The truth, in that silent, messy moment, suddenly felt tangible. Joe slipped silently back into the corridor, understanding he had just witnessed a wholly unscripted moment that had nothing to do with the cameras, the lights, or the gossip. Arthur finally looked up, pulling the compact mirror from his pocket, holding the little silver token of the secret promise. He knew then that the most famous woman in the world had used her power not to shine brighter, but to create a private miracle for a man the world had never even bothered to see. The world of Hollywood is obsessed with the dramatic entrance, but true kindness often relies on the quiet exit, a secret act performed without applause or witness. The next morning, Marilyn Monroe was back on the set, the platinum facade rebuilt, the famous smile perfectly in place, carrying the weight of the secret like an invisible crown. She delivered her lines flawlessly, the cameras rolling, the crew doing their jobs, all seemingly back to normal. But for two people on that vast soundstage, everything had fundamentally changed. As Marilyn took her mark, she allowed her gaze to drift just once toward the back corridor, where Arthur was now beginning his daytime shift, sweeping the floor. Arthur looked up at the exact same moment. There was no exchange of words, no grand gesture, not even a nod, only a fleeting, intense moment of recognition. In that look, Marilyn communicated, "Your secret is safe. Your daughter is safe." And Arthur's eyes, clear and filled with quiet gratitude instead of raw terror, communicated, "Thank you for seeing me." It was the most profound, powerful moment of the entire day and the most private. The crew, still whispering about Marilyn's alleged tantrum, now treated Arthur differently. They didn't know why he had suddenly been moved to the easier day shift or how his financial problems had vanished overnight, but they knew something significant had occurred. Joe the Grip, who had witnessed Arthur's breakdown of relief in the lunchroom, was one of the few who had an inkling. He started saying, "Good morning, Arthur," instead of walking past him. The general mood toward the invisible staff shifted a tiny, almost imperceptible fraction, a ripple effect from one act of genuine, unexpected grace. Arthur carried that tiny silver compact mirror with him every day. It was his anchor, his reminder that even at the height of despair, an angel in a satin robe had knelt down and restored his dignity. He never once broke his vow of silence. He never told his wife or his daughter who their anonymous benefactor was. The story of Amelia's recovery became a miracle attributed to hard work and good fortune. Years later, when Arthur finally retired, he passed the compact mirror on to Amelia, telling her only that it came from the kindest soul he had ever met in the studios. The narrator reflects that the greatest acts of kindness in Hollywood are the ones never performed for the camera. Marilyn, the most visible woman in the world, found her deepest human moment not in front of millions of flashing bulbs, but in the dark corner of a maintenance alcove, saving the family of the most invisible man. This private gesture, kept sacred until the end of her life, reveals the heart of Norma Jean, the woman who knew what it meant to be utterly forgotten and was determined to use her impossible fame to make sure one good man and his family were seen and remembered. The true legacy of Marilyn Monroe isn't found in the iconic photographs, but in the quiet lives she touched and the secrets she kept. The story of the studio janitor and the silver compact mirror is a testament to the power of a heart that dared to love humanity more than celebrity. If this story of secret kindness touched your heart, subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to remember the true, compassionate heart hidden beneath the Hollywood shine.